Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think what I'd like to start out with is, Mr. Wilderson, I know you were in to be able to testify on H.R. 3176, but since you are with the Western States Water Council, maybe briefly could you say, are you supportive of the Water Rights Act bill that we have?
The council has not addressed the bill or taken a position, but I can tell you on my reading that it is very consistent with our long-term support for protecting state-granted private property rights, and I would expect that we will be sending a letter in support of the legislation for the record. I'd also note that we are working with the federal agencies and what we call our federal agency support team, including the Forest Service, to identify potential needs of the federal agencies and how those needs can be met within state law.
Great. Well, I truly appreciate your support for state rights and private property rights, and I'd like to follow up a little bit in terms of the question of my good friend, the ranking member's question in regards to the urgency of being able to pass this legislation and to be able to have it move forward. And Mr. Corbin, Mr. Porzak, perhaps you'd like to be able to address this. Does it disturb you? Well, first of all, let's go, Mr. Porzak, to your point. Mr. Corbin, I think you addressed it as well. You've invested millions of dollars developing, paying for water rights. That's a balance sheet item for you, I think, that you noted. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Does it disturb you that, as you noted, Mr. Porzak, there's been no authority granted by the Congress of the United States, but we have an agency through a rule-making process that is trying to take your private property? Does that speak to you of the urgency?
It absolutely does, and it creates great uncertainty, and great uncertainty inhibits investment.
You know, and I know when we're looking at some of the bureaucracy here in Washington, you know, it mystifies them. When we're talking about a balance sheet item, you seem to indicate that there's some actual value with water. Is that correct?
And the Forest Service has admitted that. That they see enormous value, and that's the principal reason they want control over that value.
You know, with the proposed rule that they put forward that was only slapped down because they did not follow their own administrative procedures initially to be able to come forward with, what is the Forest Service going to offer you for this valuable resource that you've invested money in and paid for?
They've offered nothing.
Nothing. That speaks to the urgency, really, of legislation of Congress acting on behalf of private property rights and Western water rights, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Great. Do you have any insights, Mr. Porzak, why you noted 20 years this goes back, which I think speaks to the urgency? It's Groundhog Day every day for the Forest Service. They just keep doing the same thing over and over again in terms of overreach. What do you suppose, why do they continue to try and pursue your water rights?
They've actually, one of the principal attorneys for the Forest Service has written a law review article, which is a roadmap to exactly what they're doing. And they tried in the U.S. Supreme Court, U.S. v. New Mexico, and lost there to get the right to this water under Federal Reserve rights. They've tried in the state Supreme Courts, and they lost in that venue as well. And so now the strategy is to use their permitting authority as an end run around a state water law to basically obtain those water rights for free. That's so always been their game plan.
Ignore state water law, ignore Congress, just write a rule.
Yes, and there's always been a federal deference to state water laws, right. And that's particularly important throughout the West because so much water arises on the Forest Service or federal lands, and that's the issue that we face. Where it's basically an end run around, as I mentioned, to that state water law.
You know, we're talking about the U.S. Forest Service. Do you see any other federal agencies that are going to try and pursue these policies as well?
In your area, the Club 20, which you're familiar with, that question was put to the regional head of the BLM. And they asked, it was in May of 2012, what they thought about the Forest Service efforts. And they announced at that public meeting that what they thought, what the Forest Service was doing was great. And if they succeeded, they were going to do the same. And as a result of that, Club 20 passed its policy in May of 2012, opposing those efforts by all federal agencies.
So the people don't want it, the state doesn't want it, the private property owners don't want this, but the federal government, the BLM, the Forest Service, perhaps others are going to continue a policy of taking.
That's correct.
Right. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the witnesses.